On June 13th, 1998, Michael Jordan beat the Utah Jazz in 6 games in the finals. This NBA Finals got him his 6th ring. The 6th ring finalized what is widely known as the best career in NBA history. From the day he got drafted to this date right here, Michael Jordan achieved what most could dream to achieve. Michael Jordan is a 6-time champion, a 5-time MVP, a 10-time scoring champion, a 6-time finals MVP. Do I have to keep going on? But what if none of this ever existed? It sounds crazy, right? What if Michael Jordan never decided to play basketball and did something else? What effects would this have for decades of basketball? How would the other stars of his era be affected? How would his teammates be affected? And most importantly, how would this affect the culture of basketball? To no one's surprise, if Michael Jordan was never in the league, the NBA would look a whole lot different. But let's start on draft night. Michael Jordan was the 3rd pick in the 1984 NBA draft. If Jordan never existed, who would the Bulls have drafted instead? Well, if we assume the Bulls would have picked the same position as Jordan, a shooting guard, we can assume the Bulls would have picked Alvin Robertson. Alvin Robertson was originally the 7th pick from the San Antonio Spurs. Robertson wasn't a bad player by any means. He was a solid wing scorer that led the league in steals for 3 years. Alvin Robertson had a few years around the late 80s and early 90s where he averaged around 15 to 20 points a game. But of course, he was nothing compared to Jordan. If the Bulls had Alvin Robinson instead of Michael Jordan, their franchise wouldn't have dominated the 90s like MJ's Bulls did. This team may have had a few decent years around Robinson's prime, but they wouldn't have come close to the championships like Jordan's Bulls did. There's a good chance that the Chicago Bulls would have 0 rings to this day if it weren't for Jordan. I don't see a Robinson and Pippen duo really doing much in the playoffs. Speaking of Pippen, how would a Jordanless NBA affect his Bulls teammates? If Jordan wasn't in the league, to no one's surprise, Jordan's teammates would be seen drastically different today. We'll start off with Jordan's partner in crime, Scottie Pippen. I think it's pretty obvious to say that the teams he was on really positively affect his reputation as a basketball player. It's a really similar situation that Klay Thompson and Draymond Green had in the last video. If Scottie Pippen didn't have MJ by his side, we would see Pippen as just a regular all-star. We wouldn't have seen the same greatness attached to his name that he does now. I think Pippen would be put in the same categories of players like Bernard King, Larry Nance, or Latrell Sprewell. I think something similar would happen to Dennis Rodman. Rodman today is really known for his years with the MJ Bulls. If the Jordan Bulls were never a thing, Rodman would lose a lot of his relevance in NBA history. But how would an NBA without MJ affect other stars and great teams around the league? Michael Jordan ruthlessly dominated the NBA for the majority of the 90s. This led to countless superstars and great teams not reaching their potential of success they could have achieved. But in a league with no Michael Jordan, this never happened. This means that these great teams and players would see more success. Without MJ, 6 championships and 5 MVPs are up for grabs. As we can see here, I made a table of the years from 1991 to 1998 in the original champions and the runner-ups, and a new table in the league without Michael Jordan. As we can see, there are a lot of new champions without Jordan, but let's go through this. In 1991, originally the Bulls beat the LA Lakers in 5 games. Without MJ, this series would have been Lakers versus Pistons, and I would take the Lakers in 6 games. Next, in 1992, the Bulls originally beat the Trailblazers. Without Jordan, it would be the Blazers versus the Cavs, and I actually have the Cavs winning in 7 games. In 1993, at first it was the Bulls versus the Suns. Without Air Jordan, the Suns would have beaten the Knicks in 7 games. Then, in 1994 and 1995, nothing would really change. The Rockets would have won 2 chips in a row. In 1996, the Bulls originally beat the Supersonics, but without MJ, the Supersonics would have beat the Orlando Magic in 6 games. In 1997, the Bulls played against the Utah Jazz and won. Without Michael, we would see the Jazz beat the Heat in 6 games. And finally, in 1997, originally the Bulls beat the Jazz again, but without Jordan, the Jazz go on to win back-to-back against the Pacers in 7 games. Let's take a look at the MVPs now. Michael Jordan won the MVP in 1988, 91, 92, 96, and 98. Without MJ, there's 5 new MVPs on the table. I made the same type of table but for MVPs. In 1988, I would venture to say that Larry Bird would have won the MVP. The Celtics were the 2nd best team in the league, and Larry Bird was averaging 30 points a game. In 1991, Magic Johnson would have won the MVP. He averaged 19, 7, and 12 that year. In 1992, Clyde Drexler would have won it. The Blazers were the second best team behind the Bulls, of course, and Clyde had a great year. In 1996, I actually say Penny Hardaway would have won the MVP. The Magic would have been the best team in the East without the Bulls, and Penny was having a historic year. And lastly, in 1998, Karl Malone wins his second MVP. No real explanation needed for him. So, without MJ, the history of the NBA changes a lot. I think that's pretty clear. In exchange for really like 3 players' legacies going down the drain, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, 16 significant players from this era would be greatly benefited from a league without Jordan. These players are Karl Malone, John Stockton, Shawn Kemp, Gary Payton, Reggie Miller, Rick Smits, Alonzo Mourning, Charles Barkley, Penny Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing, Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Isaiah Thomas. The Cavs, Suns, Jazz, and Supersonics would add a new championship from that era. The Lakers would add even more championships from that era. Clyde Drexler and Penny Hardaway would add an MVP to their resume. Charles Barkley and Karl Malone would add another MVP on top of their existing ones. I think this all goes to show you how dominant MJ and his Bulls were in the 90s. They stopped countless superstars from achieving anything close to sensational. Michael Jordan sabotaged the legacies of too many superstars. But if MJ wasn't in the NBA, I think the real player we need to look at is from another era. Do you want to make money? Are you into sports like I am? Then online sports betting may be something for you. Our friends over at BetUS make sports betting fun and easy. BetUS is one of the most well-known sports books online. You can bet on many different sports like basketball, football, baseball, and more. If you're interested in this, go bet on all of your favorite teams with the link in the description. Of course, the video wouldn't be complete without the mention of the GOAT debate, which I've probably done too many times on my channel. But you can't mention MJ's competition without talking about LeBron. If MJ wasn't in the league, I don't really think there would be a GOAT debate. LeBron James would already hold that crown. Without Jordan reigning dominion over the history books, the argument would have been between LeBron James and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Not to mention that Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Karl Malone would each both have more compelling GOAT cases because they would have achieved more without MJ in the way. But the real debate would be between LeBron and Kareem. Both of these players' strengths are their longevity, but I think it's pretty obvious that LeBron's longevity is just far superior than Kareem. I don't think I need any charts or numbers to prove myself here. However, something else that isn't as black and white would be how the play style of the NBA would be affected by this. The NBA was originally strictly dominated by big men. Players like Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were the superior forces to be reckoned with in the league. Very few guards from the 50s, 60s, and 70s really got to make a significant impact on championships. To be blunt, guards were barely ever the best player or the vocal points of the teams back then. But around the mid to late 80s, this all changed. The two players that really changed this are Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. These two players pioneered the path for guard-dominant basketball. These two players proved that your best player doesn't need to be a stocky 7-footer that sits under the rim. They proved that your best player can be a not as big player that's skilled on the perimeter. You could even include Larry Bird with them because of his innovation of the three-point shot. Don't believe me? The MVPs over the history of the NBA explain my point just fine. Right here, we have this color-coordinated chart of the MVPs of NBA history. Red means that they were a center, and blue means that they were a point guard. From 1956 to 1983, there were a mind-blowing 3 non-big men that won the MVP. These players were Bob Cousy, Oscar Robertson, and Julius Erving. So really 2 guards. That means in the first 28 years of the league, there was an 89% chance the MVP would go to a center. From 1984 to 1992, there was a 9-year streak of non-big men winning the award. And then after that, we saw the award have more variety in its position. No single position dominates the list anymore. Without MJ in the league, it would affect the players that MJ affected the most, aka his clone. A great example of this is who I know you guys are thinking of when you hear MJ clone, Kobe Bryant. Think about how much different Kobe's game would be without the influence of Michael Jordan. Kobe was literally a carbon copy of MJ. Kobe mastered everything from MJ's game. His fadeaway, his footwork, his deadly mid-range jump shot, his tenacity, his mentality, his work ethic, his swag, his competitiveness. Do I need to keep going on? Think about how much different Kobe Bryant would have turned out if MJ weren't around. Think about how much a dominant guard would change in today's game without the influence of Jordan. The last major thing that would change if MJ weren't around isn't something that's quite in the game, but more than just MVPs and championships. Michael Jordan affected the culture of basketball. No one has affected the culture of basketball more than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, with the flashy play style, his competitiveness, his swag, and of course how dang good he was at basketball, brought so many new eyes into the NBA, or just the sport of basketball in general. Michael Jordan brought a global explosion of people to the game, something no one else could do at the time. Michael Jordan was exciting to watch. He gave many a reason to tune into an NBA game. The Jumpman logo is one of the most recognized logos in the world. Michael Jordan's shoes also added to this effect. Nowadays, you have people that aren't even into basketball buying Jordans. Everyone wants to be like Mike. Michael Jordan was such a marketable player for the league because of the excitement he brought to the game. Without MJ, the game of basketball and the NBA wouldn't be anywhere near as popular as it is today. The NBA wouldn't have the amount of global presence that it does today without this one singular man right here. Michael Jordan grew the league so much. He expanded the revenue of the league so much. Without MJ, players wouldn't be getting handed out these absolutely huge deals. In 1998, Michael Jordan got a $33.1 million contract that season. This was absolutely huge for the time. For perspective, that contract was worth more than 19 other teams' payrolls. That's insane. Even for today's standards, that's still really good. If MJ wasn't ever in the league, we wouldn't see these gargantuan contracts handed out like candy. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content like this.